Let me start recording first. Okay? Good, we're live. So today I want to talk about something that I think is right at the heart of global politics, more urgent and more misunderstood than almost anything else out there. The question is simply this: is Israel actually an ally of the United States? Now, on the surface, most people would say, obviously yes. Look at the facts. America gives Israel billions in military aid every single year. America blocks UN resolutions that criticize Israel. America sends aircraft carrier strike groups to the Eastern Mediterranean every time Israel feels threatened. Those are not the actions of enemies, right? But I want to challenge that idea directly and completely. Because if you study history carefully, if you apply basic game theory without letting emotions get in the way, the truth turns out to be almost a complete opposite of what we have been told. Israel is not America's ally. Israel is America's replacement. I know that sounds extreme, so let me walk through it step by step. This is a layered argument, and it requires that we put aside what we think we know and look at how the world actually works, not how it is packaged for us by newspapers and TV debates. First, I want to go back to a framework I've talked about before, because without it, nothing that follows will make full sense. At the deepest layer of the global system, you have what we call the empire. The empire is the muscle. It is the military force that enforces the rules, protects the flow of resources, and crushes any serious challenge to the existing order. For the last 80 years, that empire has been the United States of America. Around the empire, you have the world of finance, Wall Street, the City of London, the Bank for International Settlements. These are the game masters. They do not carry guns, but they write the rules of the economic game. They decide who gets credit and who goes bankrupt. Below them, the entire global economy runs on the US dollar, which gives America enormous structural power. And then sitting on top of everything, you have what Americans love to call the rules-based international order. The United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, these institutions exist to make the whole setup look fair, legal, and legitimate. But in reality, they are just masks. Their real job is to hide the raw power of the empire and the quiet control of finance behind a curtain of diplomatic language and polite procedures. Now here's the key point. Every major player inside the system, the big banks, the defense contractors, the intelligence agencies, the old family networks that stretch across continents, their main interest is not making the world better. It is keeping the system exactly as it is. They profit from stability, from predictability, from the status quo. They do not want fundamental change. But there's a serious problem. The muscle of the system, the American empire, is clearly getting weaker. And when the muscle weakens, the entire structure becomes fragile. So the people who actually run things, the financial elites, the game masters, they now face one urgent and unavoidable question: who replaces America? I know this sounds like a grand conspiracy theory, so let me anchor it in actual history, because this is not a new pattern at all. In fact, it is one of the most repeated patterns in all of human civilization. I call it the mercenary pattern. Here's how it works. A great empire, as it ages, becomes reluctant to do its own dirty work. It does not want to look brutal. It wants to project an image of civilization, democracy, and lawfulness. So it outsources violence, it hires mercenaries, local fighters, allied militias to do the killing, the destabilizing, the coercion. And here is the fascinating part. Over and over again, those mercenaries eventually turn on their masters. Look at the Romans. In their early days, the Romans actually fought as mercenaries for the Etruscans in northern Italy. They did the Etruscans' dirty work. And then one day, the Romans looked at their employers and said, "We are the ones dying. We are the ones fighting. The Etruscans are weak and corrupt. Why are we serving them?" And so they replaced the Etruscans entirely. Rome became the empire. Look at the Mongols. They started as mercenaries and border guards for Chinese dynasties. They protected frontiers and fought off steppe tribes. And then Genghis Khan looked at China and said, "We are stronger than these people. Why should we obey them?" And the Mongols conquered China. Look at the Aztecs. They started as mercenaries for the Cowa people in central Mexico. Same exact story. They eventually overthrew their employers and built their own empire. You see the pattern? In every single case, the mercenary becomes harder, more driven, more willing to sacrifice than the decaying empire they serve. And eventually, they replace it. Now, apply this to Israel. Israel was created in 1948 primarily by British and American strategic planners. Its original purpose was to serve as a reliable proxy in the Middle East, a pit bull, a forward operating base, an aircraft carrier that could not be sunk. Israel would fight wars, destabilize hostile governments, absorb international criticism, and handle all the bloody work so that America could stand back and look clean. And for decades, that arrangement worked. Israel fought in 1948, 1956, 1967, 1973, 1982, 2006, and repeatedly in Gaza. But now Israel is looking at America and saying exactly what the Romans said about the Etruscans, exactly what the Mongols said about the Chinese. We are the ones doing all the work. We are the ones making the sacrifices. America is weak, divided, corrupt, and confused. So why should we stay the servant? Why should we not become the empire ourselves? This brings me to a second important idea. How do global elites actually decide which country to back as the next empire? Think of it like venture capital. Imagine you are an investor with trillions of dollars to deploy, and two companies come to you asking for funding. Company A says, we have 100 profitable subsidiaries. We have decades of experience. We have skilled managers and enormous resources. Trust us. Company B says, we have failed before, but we will work 16 hours a day. We will never stop. This is our last chance. If we fail, we die. We will do whatever it takes. Most people would pick Company A as a safe bet, but a truly smart investor picks Company B, because Company A has 100 other businesses to fall back on. They do not care deeply if this one venture fails. Company B, however, has everything riding on success. They will never steal from you. They will never get lazy. They simply cannot afford to fail. This is exactly how the global elite chooses new imperial muscle. They look for three specific qualities. Number one, unity. Does the population of this country fully back the mission? Are they willing to fight and die for it? Number two, capacity. Does this country have the technology, the intelligence, the logistics, the resources to actually get things done? Number three, determination. Is this country willing to accept terrible sacrifice? Are they ready to do what is necessary, no matter how brutal or costly? Now apply these three tests to the United States. On unity, look at the current war with Iran. Polling shows only about 40% of Americans support military action against Iran. That means 60% do not. 60% of the population either opposes the war or simply does not care enough to back it. That is not unity. That is deep division. On capacity, the numbers are damning. America spends 41% of all global military spending, more than the next 10 countries combined. And yet, an Iranian drone that costs a few $1,000s can destroy an American helicopter worth millions. A $13 billion aircraft carrier had to pull back from the theater of operations within 3 weeks because it was too vulnerable. The F-35 fighter, which cost $100 million per unit and took 26 years to develop, has been repeatedly challenged by Iranian air defenses. That is not capacity. That is corruption, incompetence, and waste dressed up in expensive uniforms. On determination, look at how America handles casualties. The Pentagon is terrified of reporting soldier deaths to the American public. During World War II, at the Battle of Iwo Jima, America lost over 6,000 Marines taking one small island. And the country was proud of that sacrifice because they understood winning required blood. Today, America sends 5,000 Marines into a potential conflict with a nation of 90 million people, mountainous terrain, and a sophisticated military doctrine, hoping for a quick and clean victory. That is not determination. That is delusion. So America fails all three tests. Now apply the same test to Israel. On unity, 82% of Israeli citizens support the military operations in Gaza. 66% of Israelis believe they are fighting an existential war, a fight for the very survival of their country. That is unity. That is the kind of national will that builds empires. On determination, Israel has shown in Gaza that it is willing to do absolutely whatever it takes. The entire world watched in horror. International courts accused Israel of war crimes. The United Nations condemned Israeli actions repeatedly. And yet Israeli public opinion did not break. Israeli political leadership did not collapse. That is determination. On capacity, look at the Lebanon Patriot attack of 2024. Israel spent an estimated $275 million to plant explosives inside pagers used by Hezbollah operatives. They planned this operation for years, possibly decades. They penetrated supply chains. They executed with total precision. And with one single operation, they shattered the psychological backbone of one of Iran's most powerful proxies. Compare that to America spending $13 billion on a carrier group that had to retreat. So ask yourself again, if you are a global elite investor with trillions of dollars at stake, would you bet Company A, the United States, or Company B, Israel? If you are being rational, the answer is obvious. Now let's go deeper, because this is where the argument gets truly striking. Inside certain powerful circles in Israel, there is a concept known as the Greater Israel Project. Based on a specific interpretation of biblical scripture, this project claims that God promised the Jewish people all the land from the Nile River in Egypt to the Euphrates River in Iraq. That territory includes not just present-day Israel and Palestine, but also most of Jordan, all of Lebanon, all of Syria, large parts of Saudi Arabia, and even parts of southern Turkey. Now here is a fascinating detail. Iran ancient Persia, is not included in the Greater Israel map. Iran lies outside this promised territory. So ask yourself a logical question. If Iran is not part of Greater Israel, why is Israel so desperate to go to war with Iran? Why does Israel constantly push the United States toward a direct military confrontation with Tehran? The answer is not what you expect. The answer is that Iran is not Israel's biggest obstacle to achieving Greater Israel. America is. Let me say that again. America is the primary obstacle to Israeli regional dominance, because right now, who actually controls the Middle East? Who has military bases in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Iraq? Who controls the oil shipping lanes? Who controls the major trade routes? The United States does. American bases are sitting directly on land that the Greater Israel movement claims as its own. So the strategy, whether openly stated or not, is brutally simple. Use the war against Iran to destroy the American empire. How? Force America into a long, costly, unwinnable conflict. Force America to spend trillions of dollars on weapons that do not work. Force America to overextend its military, its economy, its political capital. Make America so exhausted that it has no choice but to withdraw from the Middle East entirely. And when America leaves, who fills that vacuum? Israel. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is game theory. This is how empires have always transitioned. The old empire exhausts itself. The new empire waits patiently. And then the transition happens, often so smoothly that most people do not even notice until it is already complete. I can already hear the objections, but Iran and Israel are enemies. How can Israel replace America if Iran is still standing? This brings me to a third law of geopolitics, what I call the law of mutual respect among the strong. Strong powers rarely fight each other to the death. Instead, they recognize each other's strength. They find a working arrangement and they prey on the weak together. Think carefully about this. Right now, it looks like America, Israel, and the Gulf monarchies are all aligned against Iran. But as this war continues, as Iran proves itself strong, and as America proves itself weak, the alliances will shift. The strong look at each other and say, let us not waste energy fighting each other. Let us divide the weak between us. I believe this is exactly what will happen between Iran and Israel. Not today, not this year, but over the long term. Once America retreats, once the dust settles, Iran and Israel will be the two remaining major military powers in the Middle East. And they will have no choice but to reach some kind of arrangement because that is what strong powers always do. There is another element here that almost no one in Western media ever discusses. This war, which was supposedly designed to weaken Iran, has actually made Iran dramatically wealthier. Here is how the Americans, fearing a spike in global oil prices, quietly allowed Iranian oil to flow back into international markets. Overnight, Iran made an estimated $14 billion in additional revenue. Remember that Iran's entire annual military budget is only about $10 billion. So in one move, America handed Iran more money than it spends on its entire military in a year. On top of that, Iran is now permanently embedded in two major global trade networks. The first is the North-South Transport Corridor, which links Russia through Iran to India and the ports of the Arabian Sea. This corridor allows Russia to bypass Western sanctions and gives Iran access to European markets through Russia. The second is China's Belt and Road Initiative. For China to reach European markets efficiently, trade routes must pass through or near Iran. For Europe to access Asian markets, the same is true. Iran sits at the absolute geographic and economic center of Eurasian trade. What does this mean? It means that even if America wins the current war militarily, Iran wins economically. Iran will come out of this conflict stronger, more connected, and more resilient than before. That means Iran has less reason to compromise and less reason to accept American demands. The longer this war goes on, the more Iran benefits. So the United States is trapped in a strategic paradox. The more it fights, the more it empowers its enemy. And the more it empowers its enemy, the more it speeds up its own decline. Let me now pull all this together and describe what the post-American Middle East will actually look like. I call this emerging order Pax Judea, the Israeli peace. Just as history had Pax Romana, the Roman peace, Pax Britannica, the British peace, and Pax Americana, the American peace, we are now moving toward a new imperial order centered on Israel. What are the pillars of Pax Judea? First, control of Middle Eastern resources. The Middle East holds about 20% of the world's proven oil reserves, massive natural gas fields, and the most critical maritime choke points on the planet. Israel, because of its geography, sits at the crossroads of three continents: Africa, Asia, and Europe. It has coastlines on both the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. No other country in the region has the strategic advantage. Second, the India, Middle East, Europe corridor. For India to trade efficiently with Europe, the shortest and most secure route cuts through the Middle East directly across Israeli territory. Once this corridor is fully built, it will become one of the most valuable trade arteries in the world, and Israel will sit at its center. Third, data and artificial intelligence. Israel already has more data centers in the Middle East than any other country. It has world-class universities, a booming technology sector, and the most sophisticated intelligence infrastructure in the region. In the 21st century, data is power and surveillance is control. Whoever controls the AI backbone of the Middle East controls its populations. Israel is positioned to completely dominate this space. Fourth, intelligence superiority. Think about the history of ISIS. ISIS carried out devastating attacks across the Middle East in Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, and beyond. But there is one Muslim majority country where ISIS never managed to pull off a major attack: Israel. Many intelligence analysts believe this is not a coincidence. They believe, whether correctly or not, that ISIS was at least partly shaped or manipulated by intelligence services to serve strategic goals. I'm not endorsing any specific theory, but the empirical fact is clear. Israel has demonstrated a level of strategic intelligence capability that no other power in the region can come close to matching. So this is Pax Judea: control of trade routes, control of energy, control of data, control of intelligence. This is what the Middle East looks like after the American empire walks away. Now let me turn to what all this means for the United States itself, because this is the most painful part of the analysis. America is spending trillions of dollars. It is sending its young men and women to die or to come home with lifelong physical and psychological wounds. It is neglecting its own infrastructure, its own schools, its own hospitals, its own struggling cities. And the primary beneficiary of all this sacrifice is not America, it is Israel. The journalist Julian Assange once made a sharp observation about American military policy. He said the point of American wars is not to win. The point is to have endless wars so that the military-industrial complex can transfer taxpayer wealth to a transnational elite. I think there's truth in that, but I want to add one more layer. The military-industrial complex is not just stealing from the American people. Whether they realize it or not, they are also accelerating the decline of the American empire and accelerating the rise of the Israeli empire. Every dollar America spends bombing targets in Yemen or Iraq or Syria is a dollar that cannot go toward rebuilding a collapsing bridge in Pittsburgh or hiring a teacher in Detroit. Every soldier who dies in the Middle East is a soldier who cannot come home to start a business or raise a family or contribute to the American economy. Every bomb dropped on Tehran is a bomb that could have addressed the crumbling water systems of Baltimore or the opioid crisis in West Virginia. America is consuming its own future to build someone else's empire. And the most tragic part is that the American people do not see it happening. They are told these wars are for American security. They are told the goal is to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons. They are told the American soldiers are fighting for democracy and freedom. But the reality is far simpler and far darker. These wars are not the beginning of something. They are the end. They are the final chapter of the American empire and the opening chapter of Pax Judea. Let me now summarize the core argument. Number one, the global elite that manages the world system needs a powerful military empire to enforce order. The United States can no longer do that job effectively, so the elite is actively searching for a replacement. Number two, Israel has been auditioning for this role for decades. It now demonstrates the three essential qualities of an imperial power: unity, determination, and capacity. It is proving to the global elite that it can provide the muscle for the next phase of the world system. Number three, the mercenary pattern from history tells us this kind of transition is not only possible, but historically common. The mercenary always replaces the empire eventually. Israel has been America's mercenary in the Middle East for over 70 years. Number four, the current war against Iran is not simply a bilateral conflict. It is a mechanism designed, whether consciously or not, to exhaust the American empire and create the conditions for Israeli regional dominance. Number five, after this war ends, two major powers will remain standing in the Middle East, Israel and Iran. And according to the logic of geopolitics, strong powers eventually learn to respect each other and to prey on the weak together. The Gulf monarchies, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, and others will become increasingly irrelevant and dependent. I want to be completely clear about one thing. I am not saying this is what should happen. I am not endorsing this outcome as good or just or desirable. What I am doing is using the tools of history, game theory, and strategic analysis to describe what is likely to happen based on the evidence we have. This is predictive history. The goal is not prophecy. The goal is to sharpen our thinking, make us more curious, and make us better at understanding the real forces that shape our world. If this analysis is right, then we now have a useful framework for making sense of events as they unfold. And if it turns out to be wrong, that is also valuable because we can go back, find our mistakes, and build a better model. That is how you learn to think like a strategist. Next week, I want to go even further. We will look at specific strategies for how the American empire could be dismantled from within. We will talk about economic weapons, the stock market, oil prices, the dollar, and how these tools could be used to push America out of the Middle East entirely. That is going to be a fascinating and challenging conversation. For now, thank you for listening carefully to a difficult and uncomfortable argument. I will see you next week.